G'day painters, welcome back to Bellamar's Miniatures. Today I'm just doing a quick guide on how I'm doing the marble bases for my Old World Dwarfs. So let's jump straight into it. These bases are solid, so the first thing I'm going to do is drill holes for future magnets. I've not worked out how I'm doing my movement trays yet, so I'm not gluing the magnets in until I work that out. If I need a specific polarity on them, I'd rather not have to try pull them out and redo them. The more I use these bases, the more I like them. Being solid gives them a little bit of extra weight, which means they're less likely to tip if I knock the model or something. They also have this small lip around them, which I found really useful for doing these marble bases in particular. If you want to get your hands on some of these bases, I got them from Back to Basics. If you've not heard of Back to Basics, they're a local Australian company that does things like bases, paint racks, movement trays, all that sort of thing. If you're in Australia, you should definitely check them out and help support a local business. If you're not in Australia, check them out anyway and help support an Australian business. Yeah, something like that. I'll throw a link in the description so you can check them out if you want. Anyway, enough shilling for random companies. Once I drill the holes, they all get undercoated with white scar from a rattle can. Then I use bold titanium white over the top to help the white really pop. If you don't have bold titanium white, you can skip this step, though I think I'd still do a layer of whatever white you have available, just to help brighten the white a bit. These coats don't have to be perfect, we're painting natural rocks here after all. Next, I do a 50-50 mix of white and stone golem. I don't use titanium white here, in my experience it doesn't mix very well, so I just break out my normal army painter white for the mix and use that. With this, I'm just painting on some random patches and shapes to help with the marbling effect. Try to avoid any straight lines or unnatural shapes, though if you want to draw in some little pictures or something for like little Easter eggs, you can do that too. Next, I go back to bold titanium white, or whatever white you're using. I water this down to a glaze consistency and just do a thin layer over the top of the bases. This helps tone down the stone golem a little bit, we're just looking for it to give that marbling effect, so I don't want it to stand out. Now it's time for Necromancer Cloak. Using this, I draw in shapes on the bases and establish the darker parts of the marble. You have a fair bit of freedom here and you can draw whatever shapes you'd like. I try to avoid anything that looks too unnatural, like straight lines or perfect curves, but it's really up to you. I'm using a very watered down mix here because I don't want a smooth coat. Try to avoid any obvious brush strokes, but other than that, you don't have to worry about being too neat. It just helps the effect overall in the end. Next I put white and uniform grey on my palette. I'm using my army painter white and not titanium white because I'm doing blending, and as I mentioned earlier, I have issues with the titanium white for mixing and blending. In this step, I just pick out some random spots to blend the white into the grey. Once again, this blend does not have to be perfect or even that smooth, so it's a great way to practice wet blending if that's something you've not done before or struggle with. As you can see, I'm doing very rough blends here. Next I use Necromancer Cloak to do another layer just to darken those spots. Normally I do this step combined with the next step, but I thought for doing the video it'd be better to do the steps separately, which was a mistake and it caused me a few minor issues later. Nothing major, but I'd suggest doing this and the next step at the same time if you're following this guide. Speaking of the next step, With Necromancer Cloak and Uniform Grey on my palette, I start doing some glazing to just add texture to the darker spots with both colours. I also pick some spots that will be pure Necromancer Cloak and block them in. It's all about adding some variety and building textures here. None of it needs to be perfect, so don't stress about it. Just work back and forth until you're happy with it, then move on to the next base. Next, with Uniform Grey, it's time to start painting the cracks. Once again, remember it's important to avoid straight lines and perfect curves here, and I also vary the thickness of the lines. You should also avoid the lines all meeting up or looking mirrored or all going in the same direction. Having random dead ends and branches helps sell the look. Once that's done, it's time for UV resin. While you're getting used to how much you need, it's better to err on the side of caution and just put less on. If it doesn't cover the whole base, you can always add more. I only want a very thin layer here because we'll be doing a second layer later. I've tried using my metal and rubber sculpting tools, the plastic tools that come with the UV resin, and other random things, but I swear a toothpick seems to work the best for spreading the resin. Make sure you're spreading it right up to the edges and the corners, then double check, as sometimes I've found it'll pull back from the edges when I'm working around the base. I have my UV lamp sitting on another desk off to the side, so after each base is done and I've double checked that it hasn't pulled back from the edges, I sit it under that lamp. You can also leave the bases to sit for a while to allow the resin to level off, but if you're going to do that, you won't want to have them blue tacked to the top of paint pots like I have, because you won't be able to get them to sit level properly. Once the resin is set, it's time for the gold veins. A word of warning here, if you've not let your bases sit for an hour or two after setting them with the UV lamp, then be very careful about touching the resin, because you will leave fingerprints and smudges. So either let them sit for a while after setting, or just use paint pots for holders like I am. For the gold veins, I followed the cracks we established previously while also outlining the darker sections. I also run some veins into the darker spots randomly too. When you're following the outlines or established cracks, you don't have to be perfect. In fact, I often intentionally offset the gold veins a bit to make sure the grey is showing through too. This next step is entirely optional, and I'm not sure it's having enough of an impact on the finished product to be worth it, but it only takes a few minutes, so I'm still doing it anyway. With Greedy Gold, I just add some highlights to the gold veins. I normally focus on the thicker parts or parts where different veins join or split off, but you can be pretty random with this and just put it where you feel like, while avoiding doing any obvious patterns or anything like that. Because we're doing the gold on top of the first layer of resin, once the bases are finished, it'll give a bit of a 3D effect with the gold standing out and popping nicely. Now we're back to the UV resin for the second layer. Once again, you're just looking for a very thin layer here, making sure to bring it all the way to the edges and corners. When you're working with the resin, it's best to move slowly to avoid air bubbles. If you do get any air bubbles, just use the toothpick to work them out. I find pushing them to the edge, then drawing them out with the toothpick works best. I know there's an easier way to get rid of the air bubbles, but I can't remember what it is. I'm sure one of you will know and can drop it in the comments for me. That'd be great, thanks. And it's time for the final step, painting the rims black. I do this in 2 coats to make sure I get a nice even coverage, and I'm stopping below the little lip. You need to be so careful not to paint on the resin, as there isn't really a way to fix that. You could try scratch the paint off, but you're going to scratch the resin. That's why I really like the little lip these bases have. Originally I ordered these bases just because the dwarfs I had came with the old bases, so they weren't the right size. But now I plan on using these bases for my entire army, and I'll be ordering more when I get more dwarfs. Though I didn't order bases for my war machines when I got those bases, because I didn't realise they needed them at the time. I should probably order them now. And we're done! The 10 bases took a bit under 3 hours, or just over 15 minutes each. I thought these bases take me a while, but they're actually quicker than the jungle bases I do for my Votan. I think 15 minutes a base is fine, though once I've done 100 or so, I might think otherwise. I hope you've enjoyed the video and it's given you some ideas for basing your own army. If you've watched this far, then surely you've enjoyed the video, so why not give it a like? And if you'd like to see more videos from me, then hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching, see you in the next video.